Doug Franklin here in the LeaderTreks office. I'm here with Drew Dyck, the author of Generation X Christian. Now, I'm just getting to know Drew. We're becoming fast friends. We're in the same small group at church together. And this new book that he's written has really caught my eye. Because it isn't just a bunch of statistics about Christians leaving the church. It's their story. It's what's really going on in their life. So, Drew, let me ask you this question. Why'd you write this book?
You know, this book started from personal experience. The issue impacted me. I had a friend that I'd gone to high school with. We were both Christians. Our fathers were both pastors, in fact. So we both grew up in the church. And he came to visit me a few years after high school. And over dinner, he just kind of matter-of-factly announced that he had left the Christian faith. And so that got my attention. And as I moved through my 20s, I'm in my early 30s now, but as I moved through my 20s, I started to see that a lot of my friends were doing something similar. Either they were explicitly rejecting the faith or just kind of drifting away.
Yeah.
And so I started to read up a little bit on the literature, the statistics about what was happening, and discovered that this wasn't something that was just happening in my group of friends, but in fact there were a lot of 20-somethings that were walking away from the faith.
As you began to interview these ex-Christians, was there a theme or a thread that ran through their experiences that you found?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of them cited intellectual misgivings about Christian faith. A lot of them certainly talked about Christian hypocrisy that turned them off of the faith. I had to be careful too, because you know the reasons that people give for leaving the faith aren't always the real reasons that they have. I remember I talked to one young woman who'd graduated from a prominent Christian college, and she was talking to me for probably about an hour, laying out all these intellectual problems that she saw with Christianity. And then something interesting came to light. She told me that shortly before leaving the faith, she'd had this awful experience at her Christian college where she felt betrayed by Christian friends, ostracized by the community. And it was shortly after that that she actually left the faith. And in the subsequent years, she kind of built this case against Christianity. So while the intellectual hang-ups were certainly there, maybe they were preventing her from coming back, I started to see that it's sometimes a little more complicated than just some intellectual doubts. Often it has more to do with some sort of emotional experience. You know, the head usually follows the heart.
So there's a lot of great information about these reasons why people leave. How do you think this book might help a youth pastor who's working with students that statistically he or she knows, you know, from a Barna statistic that at the age of 29, only 20% of them will be still going to church. What do you think that they could take away from a book like this that would help them prepare students for this really, really tough 10 years of their life?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in here. You know, I asked each of these ex-Christians to tell me about their spiritual journey. So I heard about their experience with the church and with Christianity in their childhood and especially in ther teen years. And I guess the disturbing thing to me was that a lot of them had a great experience with youth group, with the church in their teenage years, and yet they still left. But I think there were some common denominators, things that youth pastors could watch for and try to address in the people that they connect with. And one of those things is that I think, you know, I don't want to be too hard on youth pastors. Some of the most godly, committed people I know are youth pastors, and they do such incredible, important work. But I think sometimes, in the interest of keeping kids entertained, we've neglected, you know, some areas of spiritual growth. And I have nothing against, you know, having fun, the pizza, the video games, but they're tragic replacements for solid teaching, for spiritual formation, that kind of thing. And so what I saw among the ex-Christians that I talked to is a lot of them had been kind of introduced to a superficial form of the faith that effectively inoculated them against the real thing. They didn't really understand the hard demands of the gospel, what it would really take. They had a lot of misperceptions about what Christianity even was. There were some bizarre misperceptions. I remember one, I felt bad interrupting her, but one 25-year-old woman told me that, you know, she couldn't be a Christian because Jesus supported slavery. And I thought, where's that in the Bible? I guess she was maybe thinking of Paul. But so yeah, we got to do a better job of teaching our kids the faith. Another thing is making sure that they have intergenerational connections. I think that's something that came out of Christian Smith's research pretty strongly, is you can have someone really happy in your youth group, but if they're not connected in some meaningful way with either their parent who's a mature Christian or some older person in the congregation, that really makes them vulnerable to leaving the faith.
Interesting. I think the good news is I think youth pastors are taking this much more serious these days. And I've seen a real movement away from the entertainment youth ministry and really moving towards teaching these solid disciplines. So if I could encourage you, I'd say this. I see that youth workers are starting to do this more and more, and it's been really encouraging to me. There's one more question I want to ask you. There's this great last chapter in the book about the last question you asked in your interviews of these ex-Christians. Would you share what that question was and what their response was?
Absolutely, yeah. It was. I wish I could take credit for the question. It was a great question. It actually came from my wife. She suggested that I start asking this question. And it was kind of an absurd question, really, when I considered how bitterly most of my interview subjects had denounced the faith. But I just started asking them, do you ever still pray? And I got some of the most incredible responses. Sometimes at first they'd say no, just kind of reflexively, defensively perhaps. But then I'd ask again. I said, do you ever pray, even if you're in trouble or feeling desperate? And almost all of them said yes. And I asked what those prayers sounded like, and it was fascinating. Some of the most honest, angry, desperate prayers. God, where are you? Do you exist? Do you care about me? What happened? And so for me, I guess it was sad, and yet it was heartening to see that God really was at work in these people's lives, even though they seemed like they would be so far from them, and even though their language, their rhetoric was very heated and maybe intimidating to some Christians. There was still some spiritual vitality. There were still spiritual signs of life. And it's taught me to listen to skepticism differently, to hear it as the language of spiritual longing, rather than just a threat to my own beliefs. We need to listen to these people. We need to let them air their doubts, and then we need to come alongside them and engage them in conversations about God in a respectful, honest way. And I think it's amazing what we could see happen.
Cool. Hey, youth workers, this book is an incredible journey to go on and to hear the stories of students that used to be in our youth ministries and where they're at today, what they're struggling with. And it's got some great tips about things that can be done to rescue them and to reach out to them and to care for them. I highly recommend it. It's going to be available in the LeaderTrek store. You can get it there and read this book. I think it's going to help. Drew, thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for sharing with us. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Great book.
Thanks for having me.